Good morning. Page 632. This is Chapter 3 of Part 4, Vol.2, Our Muzzled Freedom. But even when all the main things about the Gulag Archipelago are written, read, and understood, will there be anyone, even then, who grasps what our freedom was like? What sort of country it was? What sort of a country it was that for whole decades dragged the archipelago about inside itself? It was my fate to carry inside me a tumor the size of a large man's fist. This tumor swelled and distorted my stomach, hindering my eating and sleeping, and I was always conscious of it, though it did not constitute even 1/2 of 1% of my body, whereas within the country as a whole, the archipelago constituted 8%. But the horrifying thing was not that this tumor pressed upon and displaced adjacent organs. What was most terrifying about it was that it exuded poisons and infected the whole body. And in the same way, our whole country was infected by the poisons of the archipelago. And whether it will ever be able to get rid of them someday, only God knows. BP. Dare we describe the full loathsomeness of the state in which we lived, not so remote from that of today? And if we do not show that loathsomeness in its entirety, then we at once have a lie. For this reason, I consider that literature did not exist in our country in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, because without the full truth, it is not literature. And today they show this loathsomeness according to the fashion of the moment, by inference, an inserted phrase, an afterthought, or hint. And the result, again, is a lie. This is not the task of our book, but let us try to enumerate briefly those traits of free life which are determined by the closeness of the archipelago, or which were in the same style. 1. Constant fear. As the reader has already seen, the roster of the waves of recruitment into the archipelago is not exhausted with 1935 or 1937 or 1949. The recruitment went on all the time. Just as there is no minute when people are not dying or being born, so there was no minute when people were not being arrested. Sometimes this came close to a person, sometimes it was further off. Sometimes a person deceived himself into thinking that nothing threatened him, and sometimes he himself became an executioner, and thus the threat to him diminished. But any adult inhabitant of this country, from a collective farmer to a member of the Politburo, always knew that it would take only one careless word or gesture, and he would fly off irrevocably into the abyss. Just as in the archipelago, beneath every trustee lay the chasm and depth of general work, so beneath every inhabitant lay the chasm and depth of the archipelago. In appearance, the country was much bigger than its archipelago, but all of it and all its inhabitants hung phantom-like above the latter's grasping maw. The fear was not always the fear of arrest. There were intermediate threats, purges, inspections, the completion of security questionnaires, routine and extraordinary ones, dismissal from work, deprivation of residence, permit, expulsion or exile. The security questionnaires were so detailed and so inquisitive that more than half the inhabitants of the country had a bad conscience and were constantly and permanently tormented by the approach of the period when they had to be filled out. Once people had invented a false story for these questionnaires, they had to try not to get tangled up in it. But danger might strike suddenly. The son of the Katie Vlasov, Igor, regularly entered in his questionnaires the statement that his father was dead, and that way he got into military school. Then, one fine day he was summoned, and he had 3 days to present a certificate of his father's death, and he had to do it. The aggregate fear led to a correct consciousness of one's own insignificance and of the lack of any kind of rights. In November 1938, Natasha Anichkova learned that the person she loved, her common-law husband, had been arrested in Orel. She went there. The enormous square in front of the prison was filled with carts. On one of them sat a woman in bast sandals, wearing their traditional peasant dress, with parcels which the authorities refused to accept. Anichkova pushed her way up to a window in a dreadful prison wall. "Who are you?" they asked her sternly. They heard her out. "Well, now listen here, Comrade Muscovite. I am going to give you one piece of advice. Get out of here today, because at night they are going to come for you too." The foreigner finds all of this quite incomprehensible. Why had the Chekist given her unsolicited advice instead of a business-like answer to her question? What right did he have to demand of a free citizen that she leave immediately? And who was going to come and why? But what Soviet citizen will lie and say that this is incomprehensible to him, or that it sounds like an improbable case? After advice like that, you would be afraid to stay in a strange city. Nadezhda Mandelstam speaks truly when she remarks that our life is so permeated with prison that simple, meaningful words like "they took" or "they put inside" or "he is inside" or "they let out" are understood by everyone in our country in only one sense, even without a context. Peace of mind is something that our citizens have never known. 2. Servitude. If it had been easy to change your place of residence, to leave a place that had become dangerous for you, and thus to shake off fear and refresh yourself, people would have behaved more boldly, and they might have taken some risks. But for long decades, we were shackled by that system under which no worker could quit work of his own accord, and the passport regulations also fastened everyone to particular places, and the housing, which could not be sold, nor exchanged, nor rented. And because of this, it was an insane piece of daring to protest in the place where you lived or worked. 3. Secrecy and mistrust. These feelings replaced our former open-hearted cordiality and hospitality, which had still not been destroyed in the 20s. These feelings were the natural defense of any family and every person, particularly because no one could ever quit work or leave, and every little detail was kept in sight and within earshot for years. The secretiveness of the Soviet person is by no means superfluous, but it's absolutely necessary, even though to a foreigner it may at times seem superhuman. Former Tsarist officer K.U. survived and was never arrested, only because when he got married he did not tell his wife about his past. His brother N.U. was arrested, and the wife of the arrested man, taking advantage of the fact that they had lived in different cities at the time of his arrest, hid his arrest from her own father and mother. so they would not blurt it out. She preferred telling them and everyone else that her husband had abandoned her, and then playing that role a long time. Now these were the secrets of one family which I was told 30 years later, and what urban family did not have such secrets? In 1949, the father of a girl who was a fellow student of VI's was arrested. In these cases, everyone would shun such a student, and that was considered natural, but VI did not shun her, and openly expressed sympathy with the girl, and tried to find ways to help her out. Frightened by such unusual conduct, the girl rejected VI's help and participation, and lied to him, saying she did not believe in the innocence of her arrested father, and that he had evidently concealed his crime from his family all his life, and it was only during the times of Khrushchev that their tongues were loosened. The girl told him that she had decided he was either a police informer or else a member of an anti-Soviet organization out to rope in the dissatisfied. This universal mutual distrust had the effect of deepening the mass grave pit of slavery. The moment someone began to speak up frankly, everyone stepped back and shunned him, a provocation, and therefore anyone who burst out with a sincere protest was predestined to loneliness and alienation. 4. Universal ignorance. Hiding things from each other and not trusting each other. We ourselves helped implement that absolute secrecy, absolute misinformation among us, which was the cause of causes of everything that took place, including both the millions of arrests and the mass approval of them also, informing one another of nothing, neither shouting nor groaning, and learning nothing from one another. We were completely in the hands of the newspapers and the official orators. Every day they pushed in our faces some new piece of incitement, like a photograph of a railroad wreck, sabotage, somewhere 3,000 miles away. And what we all really needed to learn about, which was what happened on our apartment landing that day, we had no way of finding out. How could you become a citizen knowing nothing about the life around you? Only when you yourself were caught in the trap would you find out too late. 5. Squealing was developed to a mind-boggling extent. Hundreds of thousands of security officers in their official offices, the innocent rooms of official buildings, and the prearranged apartments, sparing neither paper nor their unoccupied time, tirelessly recruited and summoned stool pigeons to give reports, and this in such enormous numbers as they could never have found it necessary for collecting information. They even recruited obviously useless and unsuitable people who would most certainly not agree to report them. For example, a religious believer, the wife of a Baptist minister, Nikitin, who had died in camp. Nonetheless, she was kept standing for several hours while being questioned, then was arrested and then transferred to worse work at her factory. One of the purposes of such extensive recruitment was, evidently, to make each subject feel the breath of the stool pigeons on his own skin, so that in every group of people, in every office, in every apartment, either there would be an informer, or else the people there would be afraid there was. I will give my own superficial speculative estimate. Out of every 4 to 5 city dwellers, there would most certainly be one who at least once in his life had received a proposal to become an informer, and it might even have been more widespread than that. Quite recently I carried out my own spot check, both among groups of ex-prisoners and among groups of those who have always been free. I asked which out of the group they had tried to recruit and when and how. It turned out that out of several people at the table, all had received such proposals at one time or another. Nadezhda Mandelstam correctly concludes, beyond the purpose of weakening ties between people, there was another purpose as well. Any person who had let himself be recruited would, out of fear of public exposure, be very much interested in the continuing stability of the regime. Secretiveness spread its cold tentacles throughout the whole people. It crept between colleagues at work, between old friends, students, soldiers, neighbors, children growing up, and even into the reception room of the NKVD, among the prisoners' wives bringing food parcels. 6. Betrayal as a form of existence. Given this constant fear over a period of many years for oneself and one's family, a human being became a vessel of fear, subjected to it. And it turned out that the least dangerous form of existence was constant betrayal. The mildest and at the same time most widespread form of betrayal was not to do anything bad directly, but just not to notice the doomed person next to one, not to help him, to turn away one's face, to shrink back. They had arrested a neighbor, your comrade at work, or even your close friend. You kept silence. You acted as if you had not noticed, for you could not afford to lose your current job. And then it was announced at work and at the general meeting that the person who had disappeared the day before was an inveterate enemy of the people, and you, who had bent your back beside him for 20 years at the same desk, now by your noble silence, or even your condemning speech, had to show how hostile you were to his crimes. You had to make this sacrifice for the sake of your own dear family, for your own dear ones. What right had you not to think about them? But the person arrested had left behind him a wife, a mother, children, and perhaps they ought to be helped at least. No, that would be dangerous. After all, these were the wife of an enemy and the mother of an enemy, and they were the children of an enemy, and your own children had a long education ahead of them. When they arrested Engineer Palchinsky, his wife Nina wrote to Kropotkin's widow, "I have been left without any funds, and no one has given me any help. All shun me and fear me. I have found out what friends are now. There are very few exceptions. And one who concealed an enemy was also an enemy." And one who abetted an enemy was also an enemy. And one who continued his friendship with an enemy was also an enemy. And the telephone of the accursed family fell silent. And they stopped getting letters. And on the street, people passed them without recognizing them, without offering them a hand to shake, without nodding to them, and even less were they invited out, and no one offered to lend them money. And in the hustle and bustle of a big city, people felt as if they were in a desert, and that was precisely what Stalin needed, and he laughed in his mustaches. The shoeshine boy. Academician Sergei Vavilov, after the repression of his great brother, became a lackey president of the Academy of Sciences. That mustached prankster thought it all up to make a fool of him and to test him for the human heart. A.N. Tolstoy, a Soviet count, avoided not only visiting, but even giving money to the family of his arrested brother. Leonid Leonov forbade his own wife, whose maiden name was Sabinchnikova, to visit the family of her arrested brother, S.M. Abashnikov. So those are the same name. Sorry, I'm mispronounced. And the legendary Georgy Dimitrov, that roaring lion of the League trial, retreated and declined to save, and even betrayed his friend Popov and Tanev, when they, who had been acquitted by a fascist court, got sentenced to 15 years each on Soviet soil for the attempted assassination of Comrade Dimitrov, and they served time in Krasnodar. It is well known what the situation of an arrested man's family was like. V.Y. Kavashan from Kaluga recalls it. After the arrest of our father, everyone avoided and shunned us as if we were lepers, and I had to leave school because children tormented me. More betrayers were growing up, more executioners growing up, and my mother was fired from her work, and we had to resort to begging. One family of a Muscovite arrested in 1937, a mother and little children, was being taken to the railroad station by the police to be sent into exile, and all of a sudden, when they went through the station, the small boy, age 8, disappeared. The police wore themselves out looking for him but couldn't find him, so they exiled the family without the boy. And what had happened was that he dived under the red cloth wound around the high pedestal beneath the bust of Stalin, and he sat there until the danger passed, and then he returned home, where the apartment was sealed shut, and went to the neighbors and to acquaintances and to friends of his papa and mama. And not only did no one take that small boy into their family, but they refused even to let him spend the night. And so he went and turned himself in at an orphanage. Contemporaries, fellow citizens, do you recognize here your own swinish faces? But all that was only the minimal degree of betrayal, to turn one's back. But how many other alluring degrees were there? Or there were. And what a multitude of people descended them. Those who fired Kavashan's mother from work, they did not also turn their back. Did they not also turn their backs and make their own contribution? Those who hearkened to the reign of the security men and sent Nikitin's wife to manual labor so that she would give in and become a stoolie all the sooner? Yes, those editors who rushed to cross off the name of the writer who had been arrested the day before, Marshal Blucher. He is a symbol of that epoch. He sat like an owl in the presidium of the court and judged Tukhachevsky, and Tukhachevsky would have done the same to him. They shot Tukhachevsky, and then they cut off Blucher's head too. Or what about the famous medical professors Vinogradov and Shereshevsky? Today we recall that they themselves were victims of the malevolent slander of 1952, but they themselves signed the no less malevolent slander against their colleagues Pletnev and Levin in 1936, and the great laureate kept himself in training, both in theme and in individual souls. People lived in the field of betrayal, and their best powers of reasoning were used in justification of it. In 1937, a husband and wife were awaiting arrest because the wife had come from Poland, and here's what they agreed on. Before the actual arrest, the husband denounced the wife to the police. She was arrested, and by the same token, he was purified in the eyes of the NKVD and stayed free. And in that same glorious year, the pre-revolutionary political prisoner Adolf Nezhov, going off to prison, proclaimed to his one and only beloved daughter Isabella, "We have devoted our lives to Soviet power, and therefore let no one make use of your injury. Enter the Komsomol." Under the terms of his sentence, Nezhov was not forbidden correspondence, but the Komsomol forbade his daughter to engage in any correspondence, and in the spirit of her father's testament, the daughter denounced her father. How many of these renunciations were there? There were at that time. Some of them made in public, some of them in the press. I, the undersigned, from such and such a date, renounced my father and my mother as enemies of the Soviet people, and thus they purchased their lives. Those who were not alive during that time, or do not live today in China, will find it nearly impossible to comprehend and forgive this. In ordinary human societies, the human being lives out his 60 years without ever getting caught in the pincers of that kind of choice, and he himself is quite convinced of his decency, as are those who pronounce speeches over his grave. A human being departs from life without ever having learned into what kind of deep well of evil one can fall. And the mass mange of souls does not spread through society instantly. During all the 20s and the beginning of the 30s, many in our country still preserved their souls and their concepts of the former society, to help in misfortune, to defend those in difficulties. And even as late as 1933, Nikolai Vavilov and Meister openly petitioned on behalf of all the arrested staff members of the All-Union Scientific Research Institute of Plant Breeding. There is a certain minimal necessary period of corruption prior to which the great apparatus cannot cope with the people. This period is also determined by the age of those stubborn people who have not yet grown old. For Russia it took 20 years. When the Baltic states suffered mass arrests in 1949, their corruption had only had 5 or 6 years to establish itself, and that proved too little. And families that suffered from the government met with support on all sides. Yes, and there was a supplementary cause there, strengthening the resistance of the Baltic peoples. Social oppression there appeared simply as national oppression, and in this case, people always fight back more firmly. In evaluating 1937 for the archipelago, we refused it in the title of the crowning glory. But here, in talking about freedom, we have to grant it this corroded crown of betrayal. One has to admit that this was the particular year that broke the soul of our freedom and opened it wide to corruption on a mass scale. Wow. I remember what I felt the first time reading this. It really was really terrible the first time I read it. It was so suffocating. And these stories remind me of that feeling. It's crazy. It's maddening. It sure seems like sometimes that we're headed right there. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.